regarding the revised standard. Our expectations are that this webinar will provide some valuable and useful information concerning the changes to the ISO 9001-2000 standard to alleviate some of those questions and concerns. Before we start the webinar, we'd like to go over some housekeeping details with you. First of all, if you can hear us but can't see the presentation up on your screen, please use the link you received in your email confirmation again. During the webinar, you'll have a chance to interact with us in two ways. First, by sending questions to us using the question and answer box located in the top right-hand corner of your screen. We'll take note of your questions and answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. You can always minimize this box by using the button with the three small arrows. When you're ready to ask us a question, just simply reopen it by clicking on the same arrows. We encourage you to send your questions as you think of them during the presentation and not wait until the end. However, note that these questions will not be answered until the question and answer period at the end of the session, and because we have approximately 800 registered participants today, we may not be able to answer all of them. The second way you can interact with us is through our quick poll questions. We'll be presenting you with some questions and you can answer them simply by clicking your response on the screen. Your presenter today is Mr. Michael Fournier from QMI SAI Global. Mr. Fournier is currently responsible for various activities such as registration, auditor training and certification, process improvement, and ISO 9001-2008 implementation. So, without further delay, I will now hand the presentation over to Michael.
Thank you, Olivia. And again, let me thank everyone for their attendance here today. Basically, this presentation will cover the following points. First of all, some background information concerning how standards are developed and revised. We will then go through a general description of the changes and the intent of the revision, followed by some details on the changes with as much as available background information concerning the intent or reason and/or QMI SAI Global's take on why the change has been included. At the end, QMI SAI Global will provide an overall assessment or summary of how the changes may affect current and future registered management systems and QMI SAI's global recommendation on what to do with this information. As stated previously, we will collect the questions submitted as we go along. As much as practical, we will try and respond to each question, but there are many questions that will either require further research or there may be too many questions that time does not permit us to answer. So let's get started. Next slide.
Slide 6. Slide 7.
As part of understanding the revision to the standard, QMI SAI Global believes it is important that we understand the basics about the process for approval of ISO standards. In practice, international standards go through a 6-stage process for approval. The first stage is the proposal where the need for a new standard is confirmed. Each standard falls under the purview of a technical committee which oversees working groups and subcommittees. The need is confirmed to go forward with a standard via a vote by the relevant technical committee. The next stage is called the preparatory stage, where a selected subcommittee, usually consisting of a working group of technical experts, prepares a working draft. Several working drafts may be created until the working group is satisfied, at which time it is forwarded to the parent committee for some consensus building. The parent committee reviews the working draft, and upon agreement with any technical comments, a committee draft is issued. This draft is distributed and commented by the technical committee or subcommittee members and may require several committee drafts. Upon agreement, the committee draft is then elevated to what they call a draft international standard, or DIS. At the inquiry stage, the DIS is circulated to all members of ISO for comment over a 5-month period. Technical comments may be considered at this time for incorporation. Elevation to a final draft international standard, or FDIS, occurs based on a vote by the technical committee members. If approval is not obtained, then the document is returned to the technical or subcommittee for redrafting. The FDIS is circulated for approval by all ISO member bodies for a period of 2 months. Technical comments are no longer considered at this stage, but registered for consideration during a future revision. Approval, again, is based on voting with specific acceptance criteria. The FDIS then becomes an approved standard with only minor editorial changes allowed. The final text becomes the standard that is published by the ISO Central Secretariat. In order to ensure that standards maintain relevancy, A formal review process is mandated. Standards may be confirmed as written, revised, or withdrawn. As a minimum, all international standards are reviewed at least 3 years after publication and every 5 years after the first review by all the ISO member bodies. Again, it is done through voting by primary members to determine what happens with the standard. Slide 8.
Slide 8.
So why is ISO 9001-2000 going to be revised at this standard, or has been revised? Well, let's look at the past timeline. The ISO 9001-2000 standard was issued with a publication date of December 15, 2000. Many of you are probably aware that the new requirements of ISO 9001 were a paradigm shift from the previous 1994 version in reference to implementing a management system based on processes and not solely on elements. Due to the significant degree of change, a 3-year period of implementation was established, with the 1994 version withdrawn as of December 15, 2003. As stated previously, the ISO standard approval process requires a review at least every 5 years. Based on the original issue date of December 15, 2000, a review would normally be conducted by the end of 2005. However, due to the extended implementation period, the actual date for the revision would need to be 2008. An interim measure was conducted in 2005 by the responsible subcommittee that reaffirmed the current and content and approval of the 2000 version of the standard. Next slide.
Slide 9.
So who is responsible for revising the standard? Well, the revision of the standard for ISO 9000 rests with Technical Committee TC-176, Subcommittee 2 on Quality Systems. The Secretary for TC-176 is Mr. David Zimmerman, who is employed by the Canadian Standards Association. The chairperson is Dr. Trevor Smith from Kodak, who has a close affiliation with CSA and has assisted CSA and QMISA Global on past technical issues. The Secretary of the subcommittee is Mr. Charles Corey of BSI, who has been a part of the committee since 1993. And Dr. John Davies is the current chairperson of Subcommittee 2 for the last 5 years. Currently, there are 65 representatives from 65 countries on Subcommittee 2, with another 10 countries participating as observers. Participating countries have voting rights on all standards, while observing countries do not. Canada, the United States, and Mexico are represented by SEC, the Standards Council of Canada, ANSI, and DGN, respectively. With such a diverse representation, it can be agreed that reaching a consensus on what should be changed and what should not be changed can be difficult, especially when one considers the various nuance of language. It should also be evident that the individual responsible for overseeing the change have extensive background and experience with ISO and quality management standards. Next slide.
Slide 10.
Before we get into the details of the proposed changes to ISO 9001, I would like to provide some clarification on standard harmonization. Many of you may have heard that ISO 9001 would eventually merge with ISO 14001, Environmental Management Systems. While it isn't the intent of ISO to harmonize standards as much as practical, the current business plans for TC-176 and TC-207, which is the technical committee responsible for ISO 14000, do not specify a specific path for integration of the standards. Both committees are very sensitive to the needs of users who wish to implement both quality and environmental management systems. Many organizations may choose to implement both a QMS and an EMS, but due to cost or other reasons, the organization may choose to only register one of the management system standards. So having a single integrated quality and environmental standard would not serve all stakeholders.